Hello and welcome to the Must Talk podcast. This is Conor O'Boyle. Okay, this is the first episode of 2019 and today I'll be speaking with Australian-Irish composer Natasa Paulberg. Natasa works across many different mediums such as film, concert hall, advertising and games. She is the lead composer of the Haunted Planet Studios gaming company and has many accolades to her name, including winner of the Contemporary Music Centre's 2012 Ad Astra competition. In 2013, she was awarded the Fulbright Scholarship to attend UCLA's esteemed film scoring program, and last year she was shortlisted for the Jerry Goldsmith Award. Natasa has worked with many notable composers such as Christopher Young and Gary Scheinman. She is also active in applied research and regularly contributes to papers on various topics, some of which we get into during this conversation. She's very interested in the future of established mediums such as film and gaming, and we talk about what that might look like in the near term. So without further preamble, I give you Natasa Paulberg. Okay, so I'm here with Natasa Paulberg in Dublin, and we are going to have a conversation about her life in music, I guess. So Natasa, how are you?
I'm well. Apart from a bit of laryngitis, I'm great.
Right. Well, let's start off with how you would describe yourself as a musician in general. Mm-hmm. Where would you start?
You know, I'll probably go back to the beginning, but I started as a performer. Actually, right. That would have been my first thing. And I only realised later that I am a performer and composer. So I used to perform a lot of piano, singing, and I did the whole classical route of, the grades through piano. And then I realised that I got really bored with playing the same things over and over again. And I used to make things up myself and improvise. Right. And that's how I realised, I'm actually more of a creative. I'd actually call myself creative, composer, musician, performer. Because it's the creative process, I think, that really interests me the most in anything I do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'd say I'm a composer, performer, but overall a creative.
A creative, okay. And you are a composer in the traditional sense of the word, right? So you have come from the classical background and you compose. Would you say that you compose exclusively in that medium, or would you kind of dabble in electronics and kind of this sort of combination hybrid type sounds, or would you be John Williams? I only write for orchestras and that's it. Or acoustic instruments, I guess.
Acoustic. I think, I am most comfortable with acoustic. I do. I mean, I have to say it just comes very naturally or easily. And it's something that I really understand. The acoustic, the orchestral world is something that's like really a part of me, I think. Right. But however, I do love sound and more of like getting acoustic instruments than processing. With the hybrid stuff, what I do love to do is actually get acoustic instruments and then stretch the sounds or reverse them or just do a lot of audio processing to them, make beats out of them, textures, but then I always put an acoustic I call it straight playing instrument on top of it as well. So I like the blend, and I love the idea of using acoustic instruments with audio processing, with live instruments, because I think the blend is really nice because they're coming from the same sound world, if you know what I mean. Right. But I do use electronics, like I do, I love the Omnisphere, I love a lot of the samples, but I always tend to go to the more organic sounding ones rather than the glitchy electronic stuff. So I do the hybrid, but I try and stay organic. I think that's what interests me the most.
Right. And massive congratulations on the Jerry Goldsmith nomination. That was 2 pieces, right?
2, yes.
Right. So they are recent pieces are they for a film or concert works?
Well, the first one's actually advertising.
Right, okay.
So, yeah, that was just one of those weird serendipity things where, so obviously I'm based in Dublin, go to LA and a lot in LA as well, but I'm originally from Melbourne. Right. So I got this call from my agent saying, there's this ad company in London via Melbourne, like Melbourne via London, I should say, that they can't find the right piece because it is a I would call it a neoclassical, contemporary classical piece that they were looking for, and they didn't have anything in the libraries. So I was like, oh, I'll just put something together, as you do overnight. You just stay up all night and put something together. Yeah. And it was ended up being a piece of music for a bank campaign for the whole year it's the National Australia Bank ad campaign. So it's in about, I think, 30 commercials or snippets or versions, and at the football, Australian stadium football on the TV. So that's how that came about, really strangely. But I guess for me, I really had a great sense about it because it's from Melbourne, my hometown. I thought, what are the chances on the other side of the world? So that's what got nominated, which is really nice.
What's the criteria for a Jerry Goldsmith Award? Because he's a very, very unique voice.
He is.
So I was just wondering how they sort of judge or what they're looking for in terms of that sort of, because he would be very much in that sort of vein that you previously described of taking sounds and processing them and then blending them with the source sound being played as it traditionally would be. I'm thinking kind of Chinatown and those sort of crazy combination scores. So what were they looking for, anything in particular, or did you do anything in particular that is kind of noteworthy in that sort of Jerry Goldsmith vein, quote unquote?
I think for the whole Jerry Goldsmith Awards, what I like about them is they're interested in the like you said, the other sounds, the things that are a little bit maybe different or contemporary or unique, and it's also very much for, I think, emerging new talents and things like that. People and one of their mottos is promoting music of good value that hasn't maybe been heard outside of the Hollywood scene. So that's what I think they look through, and that's probably the vein of a Jerry Goldsmith. And this piece does actually use, it's very post-minimalist, but it's also using laid pianos and then sampled pianos used differently. So it does kind of take, you think if it's a Chinatown sound, there is a bit of that actually in there. I don't think that that's what they were looking for, but they're looking for, and the other piece I had as well would be similar. That's a hybrid score as well. That was for that category is the free creation category. So basically, it's any piece of music you want or you have, which is probably the most popular category because we all have those pieces somewhere in our databases. So that was a piece that does incorporate like vocals that are processed, panned, tremulator, used a tremulator on that from Sound Toys, used a whole bunch of plugins, but with an full orchestral big sound as well. So, and that's like a suite that goes for like 4 or 5 minutes, going through different moods and different instrumentation. So I think, I wonder that was chosen as well because it's a bit different from what you would hear every day, and that's the hybrid score.
That's very interesting. That kind of leads me on to where I really wanted to get into how you approach composition or how you think of composition and how you take an idea or how you even determine what is an idea that is worth pursuing. And I've had these conversations a lot recently, and I've been speaking to people about how you know, or the feeling like, yes, this is worth keeping as opposed to this is not worth keeping, and how you then take that fragment or that idea and then take it and develop it into something that is award winning or worthy of award winning. So tell me about how you approach composition, or how you even think about composition. It's a big question.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because it's so different depending what you're writing for. So, but overall, generally, no matter what I'm doing, whether it's for advertising or for film or for the concert hall, gaming, it has to come from the gut. I always talk about it's a real emotional gut thing. It's kind of funny. It's like there's definitely a muse out there, I think, that just descends all of a sudden.
You mean like a Greek muse?
Sort of music muse. There is something in the air. I don't know.
That was always a concept that really fascinated me when I was in my late teens. Is the concept of the muse, the Greek idea of that you are kind of inhabited by some sort of
Yes.
something other than yourself that communicates. Like you're almost like a vessel. Like
Yes.
so yeah, you would subscribe to that idea of
Yes.
of channeling. People would say that I don't really, I just write down what I'm told to. It's not really me in any way. That's interesting. So talk to me about I always come back to the Picasso idea. And he said that inspiration must find you working. It's so
Very true.
you could have the greatest idea, or many people have had the greatest idea ever, but they were not working. Therefore, the idea never was written down, or the was forgotten. So tell me about how you take ideas and how you translate them into your work.
I think that, like you were touching upon that, like Tchaikovsky and Haydn, the same thing. They talk about that you have to sit in that space. Yeah, you can't kind of the music doesn't come and then you go off and write it. It's like you have to be in that. So I suppose that's how I start. I create a space of has to be quiet. Yeah, it's your creative space. I think your creative space is super, super important. Right. That somewhere you feel comfortable, that you feel that you can really. For me, it's like I have to feel things. So I would sit there. It depends. Like some pieces, I'll sit in front of my piano, my upright piano, and I will just sit there and I'll just play. And after a while, something just comes, and I call it like it's like if you've got bad eyesight, and then after a while you get glasses that could become sharper and sharper and sharper. And that's how it is. Like it's a bit blurry. Everything's a bit blurry. And all of a sudden it slowly comes into focus. Right. And that's what I wonder if like the muse, or it's like the music is out there floating, the notes are floating, and all of a sudden they drop almost one by one. And then they order themselves, and all of a sudden it's just finished. And I think that's a funny feeling, and I don't know what that is, but you just know when something's finished. It's complete, and you don't want to touch it anymore.
Yeah,
I
think it becomes when you begin to make it worse.
Yeah, you start messing with it too much.
It's getting progressively worse. So I'm going to stop now.
And I think we have this real thing about complexity. It has to be smart. It has to be complex, and it has to be clever. And I think and for me that was a real challenge as well. Coming from the classical training and the avant-garde, in my master's was very avant-garde, very I'd call academic music. And, trying to move away from that took a long time to be like, you know what? Simple is okay. Sometimes you'll get an idea first go, and that's okay. You almost feel guilty that you got your first awesome melody the first time. You feel like that shouldn't happen. I should be like sweating for hours over this, earning it.
I think that was the Conrad phrase, go with your first bad idea, right? Yeah. I mean, there is some merit in those types of ways of thinking about it. I mean, it gets you away from the sense of I can do better. There's this idea that I can do better than what I've done.
Or I should do better. There's that word of should. I should do better.
But it's something that it definitely gets to me as well. I'm always thinking that this the simplicity of it means that it's not good. There's some sort of intrinsic link there it's obviously false, but nonetheless it exists, because I think we as composers generally want to be considered to be more musically engaged, or more musically more musically competent than people who might be considered songwriters or something that is outside of a composer. And so that you inherently need complexity for that to be true. I don't know if that's a thought that's half baked, possibly is, but I guess there's something there that using the word composer as opposed to any other defining term like songwriter or musician or performer. The word composer has baggage attached to it, because of those who have also used the word, and they have all been more or less extremely complex. Except for like the minimalists, when there's complexity in there as well.
There is.
So tell me about, you get the idea, and you have a structure and a framework.
Mm-hmm.
How do you go about realizing it? What do you go to the page? Do you go to the Sibelius? Do you go to the DAW? Where do you work there?
Well, I'll start with concert music, because that's my world. My original world was concert music. So, with concert music, usually it's a concept. Like I have some sort of concept, or I think I am very story driven, concept, mood. So I have, and obviously with concert music, you have a brief. This is your instrumentation. This is how long it kind of needs to be. This is the space it's going to be performed. So I usually have like a text or an idea or a story or a feeling. And then I'm quite visual, so I'll get a big thing of paper, stick it on the wall, and I will start to section things out, like, the intro, maybe this section A, section B, then there's going to be variation. And then I draw big boxes and colours, and within the boxes I would put ideas of like influences, like, I like this part from Johan Johansson's piece, or, I'm going to use these sorts of articulations with this instrumentation. So I try and plan. I think planning for me is really important, because then if I just start writing, I get lost. I feel like I need a trajectory, but sort of boundaries, but within, there's something good about some sort of limitations or boundaries that you place upon yourself. So therefore, you know where you're going and you feel more secure within it.
Right.
And it also helps for me not to get that creative writer's block of like, I've got nothing. Which is terrifying.
Yeah.
Whereas at least you've got some sort of roadmap to follow, and even influences and things like that. And then I will sit at a piano and then write my main theme. And then I'll go from there and I'll say, okay, this is the main theme in this part, and then I'm going to extend it. And then I might actually lengthen it here, change the note values here, and and then I go into the DAW. So that's how I start.
So how much would you adhere to established structures and established compositional techniques and practices? So would you say, like you mentioned, like A sections and chose B sections, these kind of, not necessarily they're very basic structures. I mean, it's not like you're talking about kind of like how long the section is, but you're just saying that this is going to be the A section, and then B is going to be separate and distinct from the A. But how much of your writing is intuitive, and how much of it is kind of methodical, in terms of, like, if you were listening to a classical piece of music, you can see the sonata form structure. You know what I mean? It's like you've got the A subject, and that's in the tonic, and then you've got the B subject, and that's in the dominant. And then you can see how they would have followed that, but not always. They would have undermined it, and they would have broken it, and they would have kind of disregarded it and things like that. But more than likely, they were following an established structure of the time, because it was expected, basically the way a songwriter would today. I mean, it'd be strange if a songwriter didn't adhere to the song structure. So how much do you let that govern your work, and how much do you let the work just kind of materialize as it would do, regardless?
I think for again, concert music, I use it just as a roadmap, a guide, because intuition always trumps everything. It's a feeling. It just, the whole, I was saying, it just feels right and feels finished. Sometimes I will go through that thing of, it should be in the dominant. Let's say you're going from the tonic to, I really want to do this. And you try and force it. I've definitely tried to force. And again, trying to be a little bit clever, go, no, that's too easy, that's too simple. I want to be a little bit more complex. I'm going to, modulate to this crazy key. Yeah. And I would try and push it, and then I'll probably spend half a day trying to do that, and then I'd be like, you know what? No. Go back. So, and it's like that first idea. It is funny how a lot of the time you do end up to your first idea or a variant of it as well. But see, that's concert music, and I suppose with film music, it's different, because you are serving the picture and the narrative. So that's what governs that. Yeah. So in the end, for me, I do have to, not have to, but you kind of need to follow what's going on on screen. Obviously, what you do internally in the internal elements of the music is up to you. But as a structure, definitely the visuals would actually govern that.
Yeah. Also, I think you're limited by the expectations of the director as well.
Totally.
So you're not really free to do as you please.
Yes.
You have to kind of, if you want to do something, then you have to be clever about it, because it might intrude, or it might offend the director. He might not be expecting a particular instrument or a particular register, and that might stand out, and he or she might not like it, but they don't know why they don't like it. Whereas if it was a concert piece, you're free to do whatever you want, you know. So the film world is definitely distinct and separate, and that's why we live in a world where themes don't really exist anymore in film music, or if they do, they're very short and snappy,
motivic rather than phrase.
There's no big long lines. Even John Williams hasn't written a really long line in a long time.
Yeah.
But how do you think about writing for film? Do you think about the story overall and how you would want your music to carry through over the course of the movie? Or would you do it selectively as little vignettes, like little small fragments that work independently and then work in concert with the larger picture? How do you think about writing for film in that kind of context?
Well, definitely, it's a feeling. It's I think emotion is number one for film. It's communicating the emotion of the actual space or the character or the storyline. So you're kind of choosing which emotion do I want to communicate. Is it what they're feeling internally or what the space is? So actually from the very beginning, obviously I look at the film and get a feeling of the tempo and things like that. But the first thing I do is sound palette. It's like, what is the sound palette of this film? Because if you stick to the same sound palette, which I feel you should throughout the whole film, then there's a lot more movement that you can have within it, and it will always sound connected. Whereas you change instrumentation too much throughout the film, it will feel disconnected. Right. So I think I'm like, what is the sound of this film? What's the texture? What's the sonic and acoustic space? So and then that could be instrumentation, but it's usually also, what's the pad? What's the pad? The texture of the sound. That's where I would start first, and then you talk about melodies and motivic material. So yeah, I think sound palette is number one, because I have seen movies before and I'm like, oh, I love that, what they did for the first half, and that was great, and then all of a sudden there was this cue that just seemed to come from nowhere, and it wasn't what the actual content was, it was the palette and the instrumental choices, which I thought was really interesting. So sound palette, then it would be, what is the theme? But very short theme. Theme could be just one note. It could be a sound. So it could be, what is the defining sound for this person or for maybe this concept throughout the film, and then trying to weave it throughout, but varying it, moving it around. How am I going to move it around? Where am I going to move it around? And where am I going to use it as well? Yeah.
It's interesting, speaking to other people, you mentioned that it might just be one note, and oftentimes it really is one note, and it's not one note, it's more of a drone, it's like, but that would be one note. So there's these sort of like, Hans Zimmer would do that quite frequently. You'd have these sort of like, and it would be evocative of a mood for sure. It would be just painting by tones almost, And there's people that do have mixed feelings about that. I would be one of them. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about it. I think in the movie it works, but it only lives there. It very much is. Yes. It struggles to survive outside of that. Tell me about your kind of your process of working. So, would you go straight into when you have your idea and you have your structure and you have everything worked out, would you take it to notes or would you take it to the DAW?
It would depend on, so for example, I'm working on a Brazilian short film at the moment. And for that, I know that that's going to be, you just looking at the film, I'm like, this is not a samples film, this is live. It's just live. It's not that it's an experimental film, but it's that real Brazilian, European kind of film that you just can't, you have to use live instruments. So if it's that, then I would go straight into finale.
Right.
I would actually just write a score in finale. The danger of always working in samples is you lose your imagination. You get stuck on, okay, I'm going to write this because this is what I can sound. That sounds the best in samples. So that's a great thing about finale, writing straight into a notation program is I can hear it in my head. And although I can't produce it with a sample, I can hear it and I can write it and I know a player can play it. So that's one part I really enjoy and I kind of miss in the door. And I think a lot of composers would say that. So if it's like that, I would just go straight into finale.
Right.
Imagine it in my head and just make sure that, it fits to picture. And I always have this thing, gosh, if it sounds remotely nice in finale, it's going to sound awesome with live.
Yeah.
So you can make it sound okay in finale. That's great, and it works. So that's how it would work that way. And then for other films that I know either going to be hybrid or if they're going to be more pretty much sample based, then I go straight into the DAW because there's not the point really, is there? So I would work because I know that, I have to make my samples good, sound good, so I'm going to work with them.
Right. So you're
as an instrument.
Yeah, so you're functioning in the role of producer and composer simultaneously there, right?
Because you cannot, you can't, certain things you just can't make sound well in a, so I see that, I see samples as a different instrument. It's like its own, a sample-based score is its own instrument, its own limitations, expressions, and then the real instrumentation, acoustic, that's a separate thing.
Yeah.
So yes, you think, okay, I'm writing for cello. I do have to think. I still think like, what are the sounds of the cello? What are the limitations? What's the register? How does it double well with double bass, that sort of thing. So you still think like an orchestrator, but it's just slightly different. So I would start in there, and then if I do have some live, I would put the live. So usually with a hybrid. It'd be mostly like a very small group that I'd get, like 2 or 3 players who would either play with the samples to give them a bit more life or do solo parts. And so I would just export the MIDI and then put that into finale and actually write fix it up for them for the live situation. And also I'd like to then work in the DAW because I like to get that sounding really good, so when they come in to record their parts, that it sounds really good and it's going to mix straight away.
Right.
So they are playing to it as well. So that's how it would work.
Okay, that's great. And how do you deal with, because this is something I've been working on recently, is trying to combat samples and grid-based writing in the DAW with trying to bring that element of the natural fluctuation in tempo. Logic does have a beat mapping function, but you need a reference for that. So something that I've been doing is I've been trying to replicate orchestral performances of pieces. So I would take a recording that I like and I would import it in, and then I would tempo map the project to the recording. So you're never going to get exactly it right, but you're going to get some sort of movement in there that's outside. But I know some people are like, don't quantize everything, and you can achieve it that way. But I find it gets a bit messy because if the samples have a pre-delay on them, or if they're not exactly, like if you hit the key and they don't strike exactly right, then you're gonna find that's gonna not align with the other samples that you're running. So how do you deal, or how do you bring that sort of natural flux in tempo to your music to give it? Obviously having the players play live gives it the sense of life, but you don't always have a budget. So how do you kind of navigate that space?
I try, and I always play in
Okay.
everything. I play it in myself and I practice. I actually do it a few times. You can just have it looping and then it picks, pick the best take. I play it in because that at least gives a bit of the naturalness. And then I will listen back to I play with click, obviously. And then I listen back with the click and I tweak it. And I try and avoid quantization. I really only use quantization for very rhythmic, like fast, like kind of, really like fast triplets or anything like that, like marcato or spiccato strings that do need to be bang on. But then I actually, even if I quantize, say, the really fast rhythmic sections, I would then just shift them a little bit, use the pre-delay on each. So therefore, if you offset each MIDI note just a tad, and then obviously have layers. So I have different library spiccato layers layered on top of each other of the same line, and then just shift them a little bit forward, a little bit back. But I keep the velocities that I played in myself.
Right.
Unless there's some really notes that really jump out, then I would bring them down. And that seems to help. That seems to, so it's not so, the velocities then aren't the same, and then, they're not all on top of each other, all the MIDI notes.
And would you mess with the tempo line, or would you just keep the tempo the same?
I keep it the same. Yeah, I keep it the same because I'm playing with it.
Yeah.
So there's going to be variation anyway. A little bit. Yeah.
I suppose it's just how you achieve that best. So for me, in terms of like getting the rits and rals, like if you're getting little kind of, you can get the curves. So you're getting this sort of natural ritardando that's happening there, and then you can bring it back up. And
I do it myself actually. I don't use click.
Play them.
I just would just turn off click for that, and I play the rit myself. And then I have one line that I've played that I play everything else to. So I create my own
tempo map,
just with the notes, and then I follow that. For any of that kind of real expressive rubato stuff, I wouldn't use click.
Yeah, because you definitely feel it's such a big difference when
it really
when you
is.
have that sort of like free time feel to it.
It's the humanness.
Yeah, I think trailers are largely quantized. They seem to be fairly snapped to the grid. I was speaking to a couple of people that are trailer guys, and they were saying, we really don't. I think it's because of the turnaround time. They just
There's no time.
They just put it on and produce it as best they can.
And it is a snappy. Trailers visually are very snappy too. They sharp cuts,
edits,
and so when the music's like that, it kind of it would work together. I mean, not obviously. This is just generalizing trailers. There are different trailers as well. But there is a place. Look, I think there is a place for quantization, and I always use the humanize function. There's definitely, you need it for, and then another thing to be aware of is when if you've got a lot of sort of percussive lines and rhythmic string lines, I usually do two versions, like an alternate version for when we do a recording session with live players, and the alternate version, it's hard quantized because they don't want to, they need to hear the beat, but hard quantization doesn't sound good for samples, but it helps them play, and then I revert back to the other version I have that's not as hard quantized. But so for the recording session, I do hard quantized percussion and rhythmic elements.
Yeah. It's interesting how complex it gets to achieve what the ear is so accustomed to having, and the nuances that are needed to create believability or realism. It really is. It's
time consuming.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a painter or another medium trying to capture that realism and depth, and you're trying to get the lighting right, and if you're a photographer or a DOP, somebody in that's you're like we're trying to articulate that there's depth here, and that's essentially what you're trying to achieve with the orchestra. Is you're trying to create the sense of more than one person playing it, and and these people are listening to each other, and they're responding to each other, and that there's gonna be those small discrepancies in the timings and the attacks, and all that stuff is lost when you're just sticking rigidly to the quantization. It's a good place to start if you're not capable of playing it in, but then always make sure that you're definitely kind of going to offset it or tweak it in some way that brings that life to it.
Especially anything like sforzando. There's a big thing of, with sforzando, you just say if you have a tutti sforzando chord spread across the orchestra, it's so tempting to be like, boom, it has to be right on the click. And the trick is you just shift everything off off the center, and they all come in, fraction of a second either before or after, and some on the actual beat, and that just sounds so much more real. Because no human humans are not going to hit that right on,
Yeah.
you know, on the downbeat.
You know, there's some sort of dividing line. I find it really depends on what language or what school you're trying to speak, because you know you do get the electronic guys like the Junkie XLs and your Bear McCreary's and these types of guys that are. I don't think that I've heard anything that has not been quantized really hard. You know, there's some just basic string passages and stuff, but when they're doing because they're it's almost like a rock track. It's like an orchestral rock track, because they've got the big huge drums, like the kits and stuff in there, and they seem to be all fairly tight. You know, I'm thinking of like, you know, the Mad Max score, or
Yeah,
you know,
that
that
is
that
really
type of
tight.
stuff, because it's so percussive and it's so energetic that, you know, it would just, I think it might be just a logistical problem to try and get that all. Also, the sessions are probably done separately, so everybody's listening to, you know, so it's like a process, like a manufacturing process where it's just going down the line.
Yes.
So it has to always move on the same sort of conveyor belt. Everyone has to be going, okay, so we're going to take the percussion, and then we're going to layer on top of the percussion.
So to be right on the.
So it's just interesting that you can be on the nose about things a lot too. I mean, you can hit things on the screen that are, you know, kind of shouldn't have really been hit. Like,
Is it too soon sometimes?
Yeah.
Because there's this saying that, like, you know, not saying, but I was always taught, better late.
Yeah.
Always better late. And if you're early, it really feels wrong. Whereas the brain seems to be able to say, if you're just after the event, your brain can actually put it together as one event. Where if it's before, the sound is before, hit them later. And but you're right. Like, definitely, no. In films these days, it's a very nuanced, subtle nod, but it could be again just something of like just a shift in texture.
Yeah.
As simple as that. I think that's where it is today. It's, you know, the flourishes, the John Williams flourishes or decorations. We don't really do that anymore, unless, like you said, it's animation or certain genre. But
also, you're fighting so much with effects these days, I know.
Yeah. The effects actually, they've taken over a lot of the hit points. We don't, and sound design is a huge, I mean, you could really argue the thing of, I mean, I worked on a film recently where, you know, I wrote a score that had, you know, I was talking earlier about processing sound. So I got a whole bunch of sounds from the cello, like even knocking on it, scratching it, you know, hitting a string or detuning a string, and then recording it and processing it. And that was the bed that I was playing over with an actual solo cello. But it was really interesting how the sound designer, Robin Sherrywood, and myself worked, and it really blended well, whereas some of the sounds that I had as a bed to my music then went straight into the sound design. You couldn't almost tell the difference.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we're going, this real collaborative blending of the two worlds.
You mentioned Johan Johansson before, you know.
He's very much like, who was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I mean, his scores, it's almost impossible to tell where the music begins and where the sound design ends, and vice versa. It's, you know, they're so intrinsically linked.
Actually, I saw a movie recently. Have you seen it, Mandy?
No, the Nick Cage one? No, I haven't seen it. I heard it's great.
Oh, it's not for the faint-hearted, so you got to brace yourself, but geez,
it's his last score, right? Yeah.
And that film very much is like that. It's like the line between sound design, soundscape, and music is quite blurred, but it works.
Yeah, because he was supposed to do Blade Runner.
That's right.
And then he got kicked off. I would love to have seen what he would have done with that.
And he had a Mother. That didn't work out either.
Right. Mother, the Darren Aronofsky one. Yeah.
But he did, I think he was down as like a sort of super music supervisor or something like that. So he did supervise the actual sound, because it was like very sound design heavy. So, and some people said it was great. Some people said it was too much. I guess it was, but you know, it was a brave thing to do and something different.
Yeah. I mean, it really, my feeling is that there's basically two modes of thought, you know, and sometimes the modes of thought cross over, and it really, because of the film, the nature of film, does it work to the picture, you know, and something like
Exactly.
Blade Runner or, you know, Alien or something like that, you know, the sound design and the music really does work, you know, super efficiently. But if you have then, you know, a period piece like Lincoln or, you know, Phantom Thread, you know, the Paul Thomas Anderson movie, and you're doing, you know, crazy synthesis stuff with, you know, a guy that's, you know, a fashion designer, you know, making dresses, it doesn't quite articulate the period or the time. And, you know, if you're Quentin Tarantino, that might be exactly what you're going for. But if
Yeah.
you're looking for that to take the audience to that period, you know, then you really want to evoke
Of
that
that time.
time, yeah, or close to that time. You know, you might want to modernize it in a way, but definitely you want to be using the instruments or instruments that the audience would expect. So, you know, if you're like Westworld might be a really good example. I don't know if you've seen Westworld,
Yes.
but again, Ramin Djawadi, he has that sort of, because it's automation and it's artificial intelligence and it's this sort of super modern world, like a world that's beyond the world that we have today, but it's set in a period that's in history. You've got this kind of like jarring clash between the two opposing forces, and that seems to work out really well. But it's done very, very subtly. You know, the interjections are always sort of very, very tastefully handled, and it's largely done on that player piano, the upright
Yes.
player piano that runs through. And then if you're something like, you know, like Blade Runner, or Arrival, the Johan Johansson score,
Beautiful.
you know, it really is appropriate there too. You know,
that.
so it really depends on what is required by the narrative, I think.
There's one example there, as you were talking there. Yeah, I don't know if you know The Nick. It's
The Nick, yeah, I've
the
seen
TV.
clips of it, but not the full thing.
See, Martinez does the music for that, and that's a period piece. But it's all electronic music, which is just, when I first saw it, I was like, this is wild. This is just like pure electronic, and yet it's a period piece. But like you said, I know for some people it didn't work, but for me it really worked because
Yeah.
of that, because it's about, you know, basically a doctor who's addicted to drugs,
Yeah.
to morphine and things, opioids. So, you know, you kind of think that's a kind of modern, even though
Yeah.
we think it's a modern thing. Yes, it was drug addiction was a problem before, but we see it as a real modern problem. And I wonder if bringing the electronic
Right.
side brings that together.
Yeah.
So, because that was quite a brave
Yeah, I mean,
score, I
it's,
think.
yeah, it seems to be a trend. I'm thinking of, you know, the Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes done by
Yeah.
Hans Zimmer. You know, it's set in the 1800s, and you know, you see guys running around in horse and cart, but you know,
Yeah,
he's got
yeah.
these crazy guitars or whatever he's got going on in there, electric guitars and stuff, and you know, so it really, I think you have to set the premise, and it goes back to what you said before about continuity. You know, you
Stick with that palette.
Yeah, if the
Yeah.
palette is the
Yeah.
palette, then the audience will accept it. And
Yes.
but if the palette begins in a certain way and then changes unexpectedly, and you haven't really prepared them for it, then there's going to be some sort of friction there
Yeah.
that doesn't quite
Disparity,
gel
disconnect,
well.
and I wonder, by using like such a contemporary sound in, you know, say period narratives like that, and then you have that real clear distinction between diegetic and non-diegetic.
Yeah.
So really, the non-diegetic really is very in its own space. So I wonder if it's like space as well, creating different spaces by having a huge disparity. Whereas there's other films, I'm thinking, is it Autumn Rush with Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, I think.
Oh yeah. I think
August Rush.
August Rush. Yeah.
Like that uses a lot of diegetic sounds from the actual script, the actual visuals, which blend and become a non-diegetic. So
Right.
so that space is very close together.
Yeah.
So, and I think, you know, about space as well, going on about space, I think that's an interesting, acoustic space is an interesting thing that we as composers need to think about, and I think people are starting to think about more.
Yeah, I mean, especially with this kind of next generation. Well, not really next generation, but this kind of like Atmos DTSX sort of 3-dimensional sound where
Yeah.
you have, you know, speakers on the roof of
Yes,
cinemas,
below you,
and
above you, and
you know, you can pass sound through the room with really, really accurate precision. Like I've been to some demonstrations of like, it seems to work mostly for sound effects, and I haven't really seen any composers taking full advantage of it yet. I think Johan Johansson probably would have, but you can get this feeling of objects, and that's what they're known as, objects passing by as you sit in the space in the room. The sound designer and the engineers and the mixing engineers have the ability to pass objects through you. So thinking about it compositionally, you might want say you were doing, say you had a choir, for example. Traditionally the orchestra is in the pit, because it comes from the period of the stage and
Yes.
opera, and the music, and the music is kind of this
Supportive
but
element.
it kind of comes from this other world, unless it is diegetic, when we can see the musicians on stage, but it's not to be seen. It's in the pit. You're not to see where the music comes from. It comes from this other place. But having the choir, that's sort of like the voice of God or whatever. You can have that choir hover
Yeah.
above you.
Yes.
So as you're in the audience, it might just be one example of how it could be used, but you can take the music away from that flat, flat,
Space.
yeah,
Flat
the kind of the flat
dimension.
canvas, I guess, as it's been, because it always, the music generally, even in 5.1, it's generally flat to the canvas. Especially if you're diving in, and I know you've kind of had some experience in the space of games and 3D and VR and this type of stuff. There's real application there for innovation, because I think just finishing that thought of composers and directors choosing to juxtapose period pieces with modern scores. I think it's also dictated by the stylistic nature of the composer, or the voice of the
Yes.
composer. It's very unlikely that Hans Zimmer's going to do something that's not Hans Zimmer. Even his Dunkirk score, a period piece again, was very much. It wasn't classic Zimmer, but it was.
It was just very.
Yeah.
There's a good example of sound design, music, soundscape coming together.
That was all done with the shepherd tone.
Yeah.
I think the governance structure for that was cool, but I mean it breaks into Elgar at the end, so it's all
very. I have to say, it's really creative, and that's what I kind of think of us as composers. We are creatives, because for me, I'm thinking, as composers, it's expanding our world
right.
of sound is expanding, and including things like sound design elements, or like spatialization and reverberation and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's like we are thinking outside of that traditional,
Yeah.
manuscript in front of you approach to music now.
Yeah, it's also trying to do something or create sounds. You said at the beginning that you were kind of interested in actual the nuance of sound and reinterpreting instruments, old instruments, and manipulating them to get a new sound from that original source instrument. As innovators, as people always seeking that next interesting thing, I think we are resigned to experimenting with sound and technology now, and that seems to be unavoidable. So talk to me about your experience because I think one of the best mediums through which this is done is games. I think it's one of the most kind of openly free creative spaces that composers are less limited by the formats of film. There is a narrative in games, and games are like huge big films now, but they're like films that we live in and inhabit, and we can make decisions that affect the outcome. Sometimes with games, there might be multiple endings should you choose to go left or right. And so speak to me about how games and how music for games is a real avenue for people to explore new and innovative sounds.
I think gaming is really exciting to be working in, because it's like it's for me, I love it because it's non-linear. And I've worked a lot in augmented reality, just very much like that. For me, I see the person who's experiencing, and I call it like, if it's a game, it's an experience, really. A game is an experience, and it can be in different spaces. It can be in a real world space, in a VR space, in your on your iPad, in your living room. So after a while, I almost see that the player or the user or the person experiencing it becomes almost like a co-composer. Because especially in augmented reality, so I would compose. So with my it's with Haunted Planet Studios, we have done about 5 or 6 augmented reality apps that are based in real world locations. So it's some of them are gaming, some of them are serious games. I just finished a serious game, and for that, especially when you work for that, it's like we're talking about again acoustic space. And with augmented reality gaming, it's like the space dictates the sound, the choice of sound, with what they're going to choose, what they're going to see. That's the canvas. The visual canvas is the real space. So cutting up a piece of music into smaller segments, it's more of an indeterminate approach. I'm thinking of a chance approach like Cage.
Right.
And, the idea of having all these bits, but then when that person, with their choices, these different bits play out and they become a whole piece together. And I think it's kind of exciting because they become a co-creator in this experience. And every time they experience that game or that app, it's going to be their own unique experience.
Right.
So we're still composers in that because we are the designers of the whole framework of this experience. So we obviously are creating parameters or boundaries, choices that when they come together mean something. So I think that would be my approach of seeing... Yeah, it's a design. It's like being a designer. You're composing, but you're being a designer of a huge framework that has to work together with their choices, with where they're at, and to reflect the space and the mood of the game space as well.
Right.
So it's challenging. And this is a thing of, we have, I think as composers, especially if you want to get into gaming or any of those mediums, but still even film's going a bit that way now. Who knows in the future, VR film, we are at the cusp of huge changes.
There's a revolution there.
Absolutely. And
for sure.
It's going to become so immersive that there's going to come a time that there is no difference between almost the real world and the film world,
Have you seen Ready Player One, the Spielberg movie?
I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. I mean, that idea of living in a world that is indistinguishable from your world, except for the things that don't exist in your world. If you're shooting monsters or flying without the aid of technology, whatever it might be. But if you put on a headset and you're looking at a room that's identical to the room that you were previously sitting in, that's a scary thought.
It's a scary thing.
But it's also scary if the sound space that you're sitting in is also identical to the space that you were sitting in. Because if you were sitting with the headphones on and the mask on, the goggles on, and the sound world that you're listening to is you're at Niagara Falls, whatever, but the visual stimuli is not Niagara Falls, then your brain's still telling you that you're in a game, that you're in a situation that is fictional, like a movie theater, and it goes into this idea of flow, of creating a sense of flow, and that's the optimal, right? That's the optimal experiential sense of being immersed in the game, so much so that you forget about your actual location, and if the location is indistinguishable from reality, then that flow is only going to increase, right? But how you can manipulate the sound world there is something that is really, really interesting and really engaging.
Well, I think definitely, I think Samuel Coleridge calls it, I think he coined the term the suspension of disbelief. That's what we aim for and that's when we get into flow, the suspension of disbelief of that space. And I was thinking as you're talking there, there's a real kind of, not dichotomy, but there's the two areas. It's like realism versus surrealism. And I'm thinking, that sound artists we've learnt a lot, whether we know it or not, from sound artists who for years have been creating installation spaces
Yeah.
where you have either very, you just really, what do you call it, realism, of realism, or of actually just putting, like, say, jungle sounds into a museum space. Christina Kubish does
Yeah.
a bit of that, and John F. Cardiff did this installation where it was the Salisbury Cathedral Choir singing one of Talas's pieces it's a 40-piece motet. So it's like, that's, we have to, I suppose that depends on the narrative of what are we trying to do. Are we trying to suspend disbelief so they get totally immersed where they are, or do we want to place them in a different world?
Yeah.
And sound and understanding of sound perception and the neurology of sound perception is going to be, and is already becoming a huge important part of these mediums, gaming and film.
Yeah. It also takes into consideration the idea of bilocality. Is that the terminology? You know, this idea that if you're watching The Lion King in Dublin, for example, you know, you could be sitting in Dublin and know full well that you're sitting in Dublin, but you hear that opening call from La Boheme and you see that sunrise on the Serengeti. Even if it is animated, you are
You're
immediately in that plains of Africa, you know, and whether you say, no, but I'm not, you know, I know that I'm not, but for a moment, for a fraction of a moment, you may as well be there because it's so effective in how they've mapped the sound world to the visuals. And, you know, that it was just a call, like, you know, like a I don't know what, like a tribal call or something that he says, you know, and before there's any instruments playing, before, you know, the pan flutes or the drums or whatever it is that, and the chants come in, just with that human voice alone, you know,
transports
you know
there.
where you know where you are. You're not in China, you're not in Brazil, you're not in America, you are in Africa at that point. You know, it's taking that a step further, and, you know, I'm thinking about there's you know, this kind of, it's almost sound art installation as well, like sound walks. You
That's Hildegard
Vesterkamp,
yeah.
you know, she was great in the 80s, I think she was doing that stuff.
And even earlier, I think.
You can put the headphones on and she'll take you on a walk somewhere and she'll point out things sonically, you know, and she'll be like, oh, can you hear the birds chirping over there? And you might think to yourself, no, I can't hear them. And she'll, okay, you can't hear them. Well, let's zoom in closer, and she'll take away the sound of the city, and she'll hone in on the sound that she wants to draw your attention to.
Yeah,
and that's a real experience for
it's
anyone
amazing.
that wants to check that piece out. It's called Kit's Beach Sound Walk. And I'll definitely, I would recommend that everyone check that out. But I think for those to be effective, you need to be wearing headphones, which is a compromise that people are going to have to make to get the full immersive experience. And then there's safety. I mean,
walking along on a busy road with headphones and immersed.
I mean, are you going to have to be sitting for all of this? Is it still going to take place in the cinema, except there being no screen? You just get a headset and headphones, you know?
And I know with the augmented reality stuff that I did, which was based in real world locations, the locations had to be picked very carefully. That it was within a space that didn't have busy roads that they had to cross.
Right.
So we did actually have to take all these considerations into the whole design of the experience. Because people do get really, really immersed, and that's something in the future that we'll have to for gaming that we'll have to think about.
I think it'll be more augmented reality than virtual reality, you know, because augmented reality is that you're seeing what's in front of you, but there are things
layered on top
of it that, you know, so you're still getting, there's a car right there, or there's a person over there, or, you know, there's a hole in the ground there that I shouldn't walk into, you know, but all of a sudden there's a monster right over there, you know what I mean? So you're still living in the world, but the world is analogous to what's actually in front of you, as opposed to, like, you know, I'm on Mars and everything's cool, you know, and I'm walking in and, you know, breaking my TV or whatever. But the sound world is going to be super interesting in terms of,
I think it's the future.
Yeah.
I think from all the the things I'm hearing in the research that's happening, but also, and it's all entertainment industry stuff. It's all going to be relevant to all of us. But I said it's like emerging and on the cusp. But as composers, very challenging for us.
Yeah.
Because now technology is an instrument. It is a creative tool, and I know for some composers, there's resistance, and it's a huge learning curve. It is a huge learning curve. But I think things are changing now. You look at all the courses that are coming out. Music technology is becoming a real part, and it's not just MIDI sampling. It is the whole thing of interactive audio, programming, scripting, all that sort of stuff. Making samplers, audio processing, and even, like I said before, acoustic spatialization. The idea of using, I just finished a game and it was all binaural.
But yeah.
Because that is just, that's for realism.
Yeah.
This was used for realism.
Yeah, so you can simulate sounds coming from behind you
you're on a
and
busy
passing
street.
by. Yeah.
Because we wanted to make, it's based on the iPad, which is very two-dimensional, you know, but we wanted to make it immersive. It had to be the iPad because of just ease of use, that people can just download it and have it anywhere. We wanted initially for it to be a VR experience, but people don't have Oculus Rift yet, or HTC. It's just too. It's a bit of out of grasp of every person. So, but this is where sound comes in, and by making it binaural, but again headphones. But this you could actually sit down and play it. At least they can be sucked into this animated world,
right?
When there's real. So we actually went out to. It was based in a fictitious Middle Eastern country. So I actually had a team out in Lebanon,
wow,
with a binaural dummy head walking the streets, of marketplaces and things like that.
That's great.
It was great fun, but it made such a difference.
Yeah, of course.
People in the canteen, and then using binaural plugins to. Some things you just have to simulate the binaural sound, but with things moving from distances, it's best to try and actually get the dummy head. So this is where we're all.
Yeah,
heading.
the whole thing is depth, right? It's depth of field. That's the key.
That's another. Maurice used to talk about it. I think he used to call it the fourth dimension of music in his poem Electronic. He was a visionary. Like when you think about, I think it was 1920s, but complete visionary. He got it, and he was like depth. Depth. We've got the horizontal, the vertical.
Yeah.
It's, I can't remember what else he said, but it's now there's another dimension of composition, and we forget that when we're composing for these spaces, we have to think in these spaces. So think of depth and how we're going to that instrument. How's that going to sound if we push it back?
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting what's happening now. So in the future, or the next 5 to 10 years, and what we will be talking about then. I think synthesis will still be an extremely interesting avenue, because there's infinite possibilities of new and complex sounds. But I think we will see again maybe a concrete, like a music concrete type thing, where you're getting this renaissance of real world sounds being blended in. So because that's the space that everyone's going to be in.
Exactly.
So you're always going to have this sort of presence of field recordings and concrete sounds. I think that's going to be, you might have a revival of Messiaen and Pierre Schaeffer and all those guys again.
They'll be delighted.
Everyone's gonna be going back and reading the French sort of concrete and the Germans again. Yeah. And saying, they had it mapped in the 60s and even before. But that's a super interesting avenue, and you also are active in sort of academic worlds, and you contribute to journals and these types of things.
Yes,
so have you any sort of interesting research that's going on at the minute, or is it just strictly composition? Or
a lot of the research that I did would be about perception. And there was one paper and research project that I did with a colleague of mine, Dr. Gavin Kearney in York University. So we were trying to figure out, it's all about, because, and as composers, it's like, what are we trying to do? We're trying to engage people with the narrative, or with the space, the visuals, the music, all that sort of thing, We are trying to engage them through notes, through harmony, through melodic intervals, timbre. But also, again, I go back to sort of spatial audio and reverberation. so one of the things my question was like, what is the ultimate or the best level of reverb that someone can engage to a sound source? Because if you have too much reverb, and you know yourself, it's muddy. You
gets
hear
washy,
it's washy, and you're disengaged from the sound source. Sometimes if it's too close, it's too dry. Then it's too the realism. The funny thing is about film, I don't know if you noticed, but a lot of people would say, you know, with a really high definition, 7K, 4K, 5K, so, you know, the real high definition visuals. Some people don't like it because it's too real. We actually want a little bit of, like I said, the surrealism. It's because that's cinema, isn't it? You don't want it to be too real because then it's not cinema in some ways.
Again, I think it comes back to the depth again. It really does.
Yeah,
you know, the more pixels in the screen, the more depth you get.
Yeah,
you know,
or if it's too sharp,
color depth and everything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The colors might be too vivid, and you know, so it does feel a bit disengaging. I think
the brain gets a bit confused.
Right.
It's like what
the vibrancy of the colors. I
Yeah.
mean, if you see like a Planet Earth, you know, the David Attenborough documentary, you're like, whoa,
It's
no plant looks like that.
like that. Oh my God, it's too real. And it's the same with, you know, realism of sound. And so we tried to find, so we did this huge, experimentation with different sound sources, meaning like musical samples, real world noises, voices, all sorts of stuff, and got subjects to come in and tested different levels of basically it was the early reflections. In, you know, you got the direct signal and you have your early reflections and then late and then echo. So we found that the first early reflection to come in 20 milliseconds, that was the most engaging. People seemed to feel like they were engaged with the space. So that was really interesting research to find out, okay, so now I know if I want that, I'll put my early reflection in my reverb door at 20 milliseconds.
Did you try it with hardware and kind of the sampled reverbs, like the plug-in reverbs versus hardware?
We didn't actually know. It was just it was convolution reverb.
Right, okay.
We wanted to make it as organic and real as possible. So it was all convolution reverbs set at of the same. So it was the same convolution reverb of the same space, but just set with different early reflection values. So if anyone wants to read it, there is a journal article about that. It's very interesting.
I'm sure you do have some sound designers that would be really interested in that. Yeah.
But as a composer, I was like, that's awesome. I can use that on my orchestral samples and go, okay, if I want it to be, you know, engaging, then maybe this solo.
Yeah.
To be engaging more than the rest of the orchestra.
It's interesting because you have these plugins like VE Pro's Mirror.
Yeah.
And you have that virtual soundstage one.
Yep. And there's Altiverb.
Altiverb, yeah. And these are wonderful tools, but I've had a lot of people that are reluctant to adopt them because they think that the samples and the space that the samples were recorded in is enough. So they would never pan. They would never do additional panning. So they would leave everything centered, and because they would say, well, Spitfire or Cinebrass or whoever it is have recorded the instrument in the space in the whenever you're putting the instruments together, they'll put an overall reverb in so that all the instruments are playing in the same. So if you're having something that was recorded in Abbey Road and you're having something that was recorded in, the LASS stuff or whatever, the Alfred Newman stage, wherever it is, they're in different rooms, so I'm going to have to put them in the same room overall. But, when they're dealing with trying to replicate the orchestra in a sonic space, they leave it alone. It's interesting. Would you do extra panning, or would you? Because there's different levels of panning. Because you can pan in the mixer, then you can pan in the sampler.
Yeah.
So it's like how much is where do you kind of
draw the line?
How far left and right do you want to put it?
That is a very tricky question, and it's something we have to be very careful of when we're working in MIDI. So I would say it all depends how the sample was recorded. I mean, some can be very dry.
Yeah.
East-West has got a lot of room reverb. I'm thinking if they just leave it all alone, it's all going to be very, I would say, quite centric heavy, because I would think most samples when they're recorded, I mean, it depends on the sample library. Some will be straight on, others might have it in the orchestral positioning.
Yeah.
So you have to, so I like more control. So with, say, for example, in play or in contact, I make sure if there's to take out any panning that's already in the actual plugin, I like it to be centered. And then I would see, sometimes I don't always, if I'm running out of time, I sometimes put virtual soundstage and just lash it on quickly, when I don't have much time. But I actually like doing it myself. I like panning myself, like the S1 imager waves, the direction mixer,
Right.
But I like the S1 because it's the width, it's the gain. You can also sort of do oblique sort of stuff with it. So I kind of like doing each instrument. So I have it set up in my DAW that each instrumental family is panned, reverbed exactly where I want it, and then I make sure my samples are centered.
Right. So you have templates that you run from templates. Okay.
Yeah. So I have templates and all the routings all set up to different reverbs as well. I use different reverbs like small, medium, large, all that kind of thing. And then I always put a very subtle medium-sized concert hall convolution reverb on the main output. Yeah. Because just very, very small touch to blend all the different instruments
I've heard a lot of people do that,
Yeah, I find that helps as well.
I've been speaking to, I had a guy called Evan Goldman on the podcast, and he would be kind of, what was it he said? That he has a very elaborate template that allows him to do, because he talks about if you're working with orchestrators, or if you're if there's other collaborators on the process, he'll have the routing set up so that he has it going through the instruments, and they get printed dry.
Yes.
And then they come back through, and then they get printed out wet, and then they all go through and they get printed out in a consolidated master file that goes. So in one print sweep, he prints out 3 different sets of stems, and he says it was. He talks about it in the podcast. I think it's podcast episode 4, and he talks about it at length and how he spent. It was a real struggle to get it set up, but now it saves him hours of selecting various making sure that all the
the stems
so it goes through and all the plugins are turned off, so the mixer gets it and he does his thing, and it's a crazy elaborate sort of processes that you need to get, but it ultimately is what works best for you and your workflow. But I think there's so many different styles of composition that require different tastes. If you're looking to get the huge bombastic sound, like this kind of Avengers-y Alan Silvestri sound, it's very, very different from the small intimate sound of the Splat, for example. He's very chamber orientated, and he really wants it to be very close and
very
intimate. Yeah. So you can almost hear the bow on string type stuff, and it really, would you have different templates for different setups? Was that how you work?
I do. I actually have like an electronic one where it's, so I have a hybrid, which is the one that I probably work out of most, the one that has the MIDI and has also the solo tracks in there if I need to use them. So I would use that. Then I have electronic, which is the Omnisphere, the sound design, where there's no real acoustic. I might have a couple of acoustic tracks set up if I want to just put on a solo instrument with the electronic stuff. And I actually do have sometimes, and again, if I have time, I have a mixing template, which is just audio stems.
Right.
That I do final mix and final export for the film. In the stems, if I have time.
And that's interesting. And when you're dealing in the game space, obviously the process is immensely different from there. So
yes,
what's your workflow there like? You know, because obviously you're working non-linearly, so it's loop based work. So obviously you're still working in the same template to compose, but how do you take it from there and move forward into the game?
So that is like, you know, so it's the same kind of MIDI, my kind of hybrid template, but it's sectioned. So I have sections. So then, and it depends, like say if I'm doing layers, one thing will be layers. If I'm doing very kind of fragmental or wavelet type approach, then I would have little sections. And I actually test my wavelets in Ableton.
Right.
So in Ableton, you can load up all your individual little branches, wavelets, sections, and then just trigger them. And I test them to see how well they work together. Because you can't quite do that in Logic. I think it's the range view in Ableton. Range view, I can't remember. But anyway, so it's just, you know, and you line them up and it works kind of like the game engine. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, so that's what I would test. And looping, looping is an interesting, there's many techniques, say looping ambient files. There's special ways of doing, you know, you don't cut at the end, you cut like 4 or 5 bars before and you take that bit, you put that at the front and move the rest of it along.
Right.
And that creates your seamless loop.
Okay.
And then you hide the seam within the file. Yeah, it's hard to explain, but yeah, so there's all like...
So it's overlaps all the time, right? So there's going to be overlaps of...
No, it's just the way you pick a part where it's similar, like, you know, there's not much dynamic change.
So there's no blend, there's no discernible blend that moves, okay.
So, and it works really well, actually. So if you're ambient looping a certain way, then obviously if you have a musical line, you have to zoom in where that waveform crosses 0. And that's where you cut, and that's where you make to eliminate the clicks and
it's
pops.
super accuracy.
It's really accurate. Yeah. So there's, you know, it's a different way.
Yeah, it also affects the composition. You're almost like...
You're thinking that way.
Yeah, you're almost composing in a way that you're saying, this is going to have to come back around. So
yeah, and using reverb tails as well. You cut off the reverb tail and put it at the front. There's all these different, ways.
Composing for games is really, really... It's a fascinating subject area. But would you deal then with the middleware, or would you deal with the programmers that put it in? Because I know there's 2 different ways to do it. So you can use the middleware software, or you can just give the music to the programmer, and they'll just program it and do their wizardry.
I've done it both ways. I think nowadays, especially for indie games, as composers, if you know middleware, you are much more desirable as a composer, because, you know, you just can bypass bypass that time.
Well,
And also then if you know about code a little, you don't have to be a coder or programmer, but if you know to look at Java, like I don't know, I would hate to program anything in Java, but I read it, I can see what's happening in the code. If you just see that and understand that, then you're speaking the same language, which makes it so much easier. So I've done it different ways. So I have coded it, and then I have just had, I mean, the best one is I love it when I have an dedicated audio program that you just give the files to, and they just put it in the code.
They just do it in
they just
10
do
minutes,
it.
Yeah. I know that there's a couple of movies have been made using game engines, Unity, I think.
Oh, really?
Neil Blomkamp, do you know, he did, he's a South African director. He made, District 9. Do you remember the one about the alien?
Yeah.
And they're living in the
great.
ghetto in Johannesburg. Yeah, he's doing a lot of work. I think it's all on YouTube. He did it. I don't know if it's a couple of episodes or it's episodic in nature, but it's all of the camera. You know, all of the filming has been done through Unity. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, really experimental stuff there. Yeah.
See, that's an interesting concept, isn't it? There you have the crossover.
Right.
In between. And I think as time goes on, it is going to become, like I said before, we're going to be sitting in the same space, whether we're playing a game or watching a film. It is going to end up being...
It's unavoidable, yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see what... You know, there has to be... And you can see there's a new wave of composers coming through. And I think, you know, we touched upon this earlier about your own voice.
Yeah.
And I think that is the big challenge today, is like, what is... You know, how do you now... create your own voice. And I think, and also too, you know, when you're working with a director, who has obviously it's their, their films are their child, it's their baby, and so you are part of that process of making this happen for them. So how do you keep your own compositional voice within that, but also fulfilling a brief,
right?
And then also, what is your unique voice? Because there's so much out there now, and
There is,
there's a lot that's been, the whole thematic variation development, it has been done, and John Williams is the master. So I think, people like Daniel Hart, Michael Levi, Ben Frost, who actually is an Australian, I think he's from Melbourne. I think these people are kind of interesting because it's the next. There has to be a next wave, and they are very textural and technology producer. Still organic, there's orchestral elements, there's electronic elements, but it's organic and it blends well. But it has a unique contemporary sound. So that's going to be interesting to watch, I think.
Yeah,
the new,
I think we're also
wave.
entering a paradigm shift in terms of like the kind of attention that's given to the female voice. That's really kind of prevalent. I was speaking to Emer Noon. She's a games composer, and so you definitely have these kind of voices that are distinct. Not necessarily because it's women composing them, but most certainly because it's not the same point of view we've been exposed to for such a long period of time, and what was your kind of response, or how would you interpret that sort of shift in the thinking, or the kind of opportunities that are available for young aspiring female composers to enter that space and have that voice?
I think obviously it's very exciting, and I think the more diversity we have in general, even just demographics, female composers, it's going to bring new and interesting sounds and perspectives. And, I think, especially from the female point of view, it's like, we are 50% of the population.
Yeah.
And you think about that, and, a lot of movies are highly, cinemas and movies and Netflix, women.
Right.
I think actually more than men watch a lot of these, series and things like that, So I think, and also too, where a film is about, say, a woman's experience about something, it makes sense to have a female director and a female composer because it brings in a different perspective.
Right.
And maybe the music's, not much. I'm not saying the music's going to be different, but there's again the nuance.
Yeah.
There will be something in it that might not have been there.
Right.
If it was a male, potentially. But I just think, like, generally, the more diversity, the more interesting music is going to get.
Yeah.
The more that we can communicate effectively because our audience is diverse. So having kind of the white male and usually older, it limits our creativity. It limits the creative expression of what film, gaming, all of that can be.
Right.
So I think it's really exciting. And I can see it a lot now. It's definitely changed in the last couple of years that I've noticed myself that, like, potentially working on something in the new year, and it's a female protagonist. It's a crime show, but it's a female protagonist, a strong woman, female character, and the producers are a male. I think there might be one female, but they specifically want a female director. And I was like, that's brilliant. They like, we want this because we feel that this is the kind of, I don't know, this person can communicate or express the narrative in a different way.
I mean, it's breaking the monotony of these sort of, I think the male Hollywood sort of, there's a lot of them are just not writing anything engaging anymore. It's like, it's been 10 years since we did that. Let's do a remake of this movie. And you're sort of, the big studios aren't willing to take any financial risks or anything. You see that most of the people who have stories to tell and have engaging narratives, they're going to TV, and they're doing, they're telling their stories on Netflix, and they're telling their stories on Hulu and Amazon, all these different places, and because these people are willing to say, look, that's a great story, go and make it happen.
Yeah.
Whereas Fox and Sony and all these people, it's like, well, is it a superhero movie?
Let's try and box it.
Yeah, if it's not a superhero movie, or if I can't get at least a trilogy out of it, or some sort of franchising that it's going to have, you know, long legs and it's going to have a little bit of life after that one movie, then they're not really that interested. You know, I think
It's a shame.
I think Scorsese, like, who thought that Martin Scorsese would have to go to Netflix to get his movie produced?
It's
You know,
crazy.
it's like,
it's
what?
crazy.
You
It's
know,
because it's like the sad thing that I can see, and you know, it should all be about the art, the art.
Yeah.
You know, the craft and the art, and we're losing, I think, the art in the
Right.
big blockbusters. And I wonder if, going back to the female thing, I wonder what the few that I've worked with, just recently, female directors and stuff that I've seen, if women, they seem to be, maybe because we have nothing to lose, really, because we're just out there doing our thing, that they're really brave, quite heavy movies that I haven't seen, you know, being made before. So because maybe it's just we've got nothing to lose, we're new and fresh to this, so we don't have this maybe baggage or fear or whatever.
There might be a slight naivety to it
And
as well.
naivety.
You know, it's just like this sort of like, let's get on with it.
I've got an idea, let's just do it.
Have you seen Lady Bird, the Greta
haven't seen
Gerwig
that
film?
one, no.
It's really, really nice movie. But yeah, again, it's a female director. It's her first movie. And, you know, it's a really, really, just a really solid, great movie. And I don't know if there was a female composer on that one, but I mean,
sure,
it
actually.
just worked though. And the lead protagonist is Saoirse Ronan. She's from Ireland, so you know, it's just it's definitely a space in which that there's stories to be told, and there's innovations to be made there for sure. Outside of I think people are getting a bit tired of the same kind of formula that's been applied. You know, you can see the 3-act structure coming out. You know, it's getting very, very predictable. You know,
Yes.
almost sort of parodies of themselves now. Like, you know, it's like you made Iron Man. Now you're making Iron Man 14. You know, it's just the same thing.
Sticking to the same formula. It's I think it's fear. And it's money.
Reliability,
Really, it's just let's churn it out because, and there is that argument for, I don't know how much, if it's actually realized, but you know, if we make big money here, then we can trickle the money to make the smaller, more interesting projects. I don't know how much that actually happens, but there is this theory of,
I can't remember the director's name, but there was a movie came out last year called A Ghost Story.
That's Daniel Hart. I loved that
with
film.
Casey Affleck,
Yes.
yeah. But that movie was made from the money he made from Pete's Dragon.
Yes.
Which is insane. Like, he didn't tell anybody about it. He was like, I'm just going to take my money and make this actual good movie.
And he made it on like very, very little, apparently, from what I've heard.
It was a wonderful film, so it was, but he didn't tell anybody about it, or he didn't go to a studio looking for budget and
just did it himself.
Again, you know, even with the podcasts, and I think we live in a world where we're looking for honesty. We're looking for things to feel honest. You know, in a world of Trump and fake news and you know, we're so accustomed to, you know, 24-hour news cycles where information is constantly being thrown at us, and whether we like it or not, you know, it's hard to feel related to anything anymore, you know, because it's like, oh, well, what's the next thing? Because, you know, there's a tsunami in Indonesia. It's a really horrible event. Right. Okay, and then the next thing that comes along. And so it's hard for humans to engage on a really deep and meaningful level with any individual story. You know, empathy, I guess, is the word I'm looking for. It's hard for humans, modern day humans, to feel empathetic towards a narrative or a storyline. Because you're only going to be in that space with that character for maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours before you're going to leave that story. And to create a character that's you know, relatable and that people can, I really seen this movie the other day, and you have to see it. It's, you know, it impacts them after they leave the theater. You know, that is something that's a challenge for directors and storytellers and composers.
because I think composers have kind of accepted that it's very unlikely that a audience member is going to leave the theater singing one of their tunes, right? So now it's about trying to get the audience member to leave the theater remembering the movie, you know what I mean, remembering the characters' names, or remembering, you know, and
experience.
That's the world that we're living in, and it's really difficult for directors to get that sort of connection. Yeah,
exactly. Oh no, I definitely think that we have, you know, I kind of think of it back to the minimalists. You know, it's like we've got so much going on. There's so much noise and static and news and politics, life, technology too. It's like we are constantly bombarded with messages, this, that. And it's almost like we need a recalibration.
Yeah.
And I think that's the idea of, like, you know, the minimalist kind of, you know, after the modernist music and serialism.
Yeah, overload.
It was overload and complete disconnect with the audience. It's like going back to the basics. And maybe that's what these directors are doing as well, of like, I am just going to make something for me that resonates with me, and I hope with other people.
And if you like it, great.
Great. If you don't, great, fine, you know. And I think one thing I noticed about film, and then music obviously struggles with that as well, is that a lot of the films that we're seeing in cinemas today, and, you know, especially the big blockbusters, the pace of them is so fast. They almost stumbling over themselves to get the story out as fast as they can before they lose the attention of the audience.
Yeah.
It doesn't. And you look at the older films, even the 80s. Now you watch an 80s film, you're like, geez, this is so slow.
Yeah.
It just unfolds slowly.
Right.
And I think we've missed that. We're just gotten so fast.
Yeah.
Like, quick.
Yeah.
Next thing. You know, I wonder if we need to just slow down. And I like even a ghost story. It just unfolds.
Yeah.
And it captures people. And
So beautiful.
It's so beautiful. And I thought about that for weeks afterwards. You know, I was touched by that. And I hope, and I think that, you know, I would hope that things go more that way.
I mean, Casey Affleck, for, you know, whatever people, you know, there's the whole controversy about him, but you know, not going to get into that. But on the work alone, he did a ghost story, and he did the one he won the Oscar for, Manchester by the Sea.
Yeah,
you know, those were two stellar films. You know, really top stuff, and they were both indies, indie picks. You know, the Lady Bird and all these. This space, you know, going to film festivals. People go to film festivals to see honest movies now. It's not about, I want to go and see what's going to win at Cannes, or what's, you know, they would be kind of like foreshadowing what's going to be picked up for the Oscars. So it would be like almost an Oscar buzz ceremony. But now it's almost about going to see movies that haven't been tainted by, you know, the vision. There's no producers getting involved and saying, oh, but this is boring, the audience isn't going to like that, cut that out, or that dialogue's too intellectual or something. You know, the filmmaker made that, and that's exactly what is on the screen.
That is that's their vision, and that was it.
And that's the collaborative process, and the conversations that have been had with them and their DOPs and their scriptwriters and their actors and their composers, and you can just see that work, you know, for all of its limitations, for all of, you know, the budget restrictions or whatever it had on it, it's still an honest piece of work. And that's the main draw that, for me, film festivals and indie films really do have, especially foreign films as well. They don't seem to bend their knee to the Hollywood kind of format.
Formula,
you know, especially like the European, like the German films and Scandinavian films. They're just like, we're awesome. And we're just. I seen a movie at Galway when we were at Galway Film Festival in Ireland, and there was I can't remember the German. The English translation was In the Aisles, and it's just about a guy that works he stacks shelves in a supermarket, and it's just the whole thing just is him, you know, in this little machine, the forklift that like lifts up the boxes and puts them on top of the shelves, and it's such a slow burn, a slow pace, and there's not a lot of music in it, and it's a lot of like industrial sound, diegetic sound, and I was just sitting going, this is wonderful, this is so, it's like
real, and
it's like going and listening to a symphony, you know what I mean? It just takes time to unfold, and you're sitting there, and at the end of it you feel rewarded that you've earned the ending. Like, it wasn't just spoon-fed to you, you know, it's not McDonald's.
Well, that's exactly.
It's like eating a good meal and the dessert at the end. You're like, I've
digested
earned
it.
I've earned this dessert. I've earned this coffee at the end of the meal, and that's what a film should be.
That's exactly. I was just thinking when you're saying that. Not only is it quick, but they tell you everything just in case you missed it. This is the villain. Just in case you missed it. Whereas the European and the slower, older movies or whatever, they assume there is an intelligent audience watching this film, which I think we appreciate as an audience. We're like, we have to figure this out a little bit, and that's where you get the investment happens in the engagement, and you feel like you've earned the ending.
There's really not an area of just life that's not sort of like either super like complex or just overtly simple. It's just like the binary life. Like there's no gray very much anymore.
Yes.
Everybody's just ruled by the clock.
Yes, the black and the white and the 1 and the 0 and
it's just like, you know, the time, you know, the movie's in, the movie's out, you know, it's in the cinema for a week, 2 weeks, and then it's out, you know,
it's gone.
Go get it on iTunes or something like that, you know.
Well, I think you mentioned something interesting there that I think is a real, I mean, it's in art and, you know, we're looking at film and music, is the non-dual, living in the non-dual and living in the grey and the tension. And I think as composers, it should feel tense. I think writing music or making a film, there should be a bit of, I think that, because that's where life is. It's in the grey, it's in the tension, it's in the discomfort.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting into that unknown. It's exploring, and I think that's what humans want as thinking creatures. They want to explore something or be exposed to something that they might not have considered or might not have thought of, or just have never even thought that that's what the movie was about. You can get into, you know, Arrival, you know, that was so linguistically complex that nobody thought going into that movie that they were going to be like, you know, become linguists for an hour and a half, you know. And there's so many movies that are flying under the radar, you know.
I think so. I think that's where people are starting to get, in every aspect, the world, politics. I think we're in a big shift, a real consciousness shift.
Yeah.
If you want to kind of, again, be a bit spiritual or esoteric or anything like that, you know, I think humanity is heading towards a shift of like, we are getting tired. We're getting a bit fed up, frustrated as a society, and it's that, you know, the rehashed stuff. It's like again and again, we want something new and meaningful.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're going to go. And meaning, I'm thinking VR, you think of meaning can be because it feels real. You're engaged. You're physically engaged with the space. Or in a game, you are engaged because you're making choices. And I think as composers, filmmakers, you know, we are really on the cusp of looking for something that's genuine, real, and that people can connect with, and that's new and fresh. And I think that's why the music is shifting.
Yeah.
It's like a pendulum. It's going to go one way to the other before it finds its new space.
Yeah.
So maybe it's that texture, it's the electronics, it's the, you know, processing of sound. But I think we are, and I've heard directors talk about, we want a new sound. You know, they're not saying, I want a melody or I want a new melody or whatever. They're like, we want a new sound.
Right.
And I think that we want a new everything. Yeah. And I think that's super exciting. And I think technology is used in a certain way is going to be a big part of that. Yeah. And our own creativity. But it's I always talk about creativity comes first and then you figure out how to do it. So the only temptation we have is to be limited by technology. But if you put creativity and the idea first and then go, I'll figure it out. That's where innovation happens.
Yeah, I'm curious, have you looked into any AI stuff or any artificial intelligence work?
No. I mean, the only thing, I didn't do it myself, but I supervised a project where they used a bit of AI in composing music for a game in response to events. Yeah. So that was kind of interesting. So it was Cellular Automata, I think it's called. It's a programming language, but it's kind of like maybe not artificial intelligence, but it's a learning machine.
Right,
it's
machine learning.
Machine learning, using machine learning to compose music. That it does it itself and responds to events itself. Yeah. So that's the only thing I've come across.
Yeah, I seen there was an AI, I think it was 2000, does it say? 2016, I think. There's a Belgian AI company, and it's the first non-human to be recognized by a PRO.
Oh.
It's called Ava, AIVA, and they released an album called Genesis.
Oh, wow.
And it's So that it is here. It is most certainly here.
I'm thinking Iliac Suites by Hillier. I can't say his name, but Hillier is a last name.
Right.
The Iliac Suites, that was the first computer-generated algorithmic, as in it created its own music. It created itself,
I mean, this is creating... This is creating symphonic works.
Oh my gosh! I think these were just like chamber pieces, but
this is creating like large scale symphonic works, and I think SACEM, the Belgian
PRO, has granted it like full artists recognition, so it's definitely going there. But
Natasha, thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
Last thing is, where can people find you? Are you online? Do you have a website?
Yes, I have a website. It's www.natasapaulberg.com, and it's Natasha without a H. That's kind of the little bit different.
Yeah.
I'm managed by a group called Avant Music Port. So my agents are there if anyone wants to get in contact with me for projects or anything.
Okay.
And there's obviously SoundCloud as well with my works.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.